Hi, I'm Chris Grimm, founder, coach, principal consultant of ARIA Consulting. For 24 years, we've been serving leaders and their teams around the world. This podcast, which I wanted to call The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but it's called And Then I, is nothing scripted, nothing fancy. I promise that we'll be talking about successes and failures. It's the gold, I call it, that you find only in real stories with real leaders in real time. With that, I invite you to sit back, soak up the wisdom here of these everyday superheroes. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to And Then I, our podcast here for ARIA Consulting, where I have the privilege of talking with some people that I've been working with for a really long time. And this is a really special one for me. So I'm going to welcome Shawn Lipman. And I will say really briefly, my version of this, I don't even know how many years we've known each other. It has to be at least 18, because I think that I started working with Shawn and his company a long time ago, right after I had my daughter, or maybe when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's 18. So long time. So I'm just going to tell you, and then I'm going to let Shawn tell you the story, everybody. So Hall of Fame rugby player, captain, coach, does not know how to do anything half. Excellence runs in his blood. Awesome dad, awesome husband, amazing friend, entrepreneur, CEO. I can't really underestimate this because my experience of this man is that he just lives and breathes the need to win. So yeah, I can't really say that enough. So I'm going to let Shawn give you the nuts and bolts of his experience. Since that I just set you up there for walking on water, Shawn. So
well, Chris, I think all I can say is that the one thing is I agree with everything you said about me. And the one thing you didn't speak about was my humility. So I'm the most humble person that you've ever met as well, right?
Totally humble. Well, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about that, because everybody, just in case you haven't figured it out, and if you just go Google Shawn, you'll know that I'm not kidding. We could spend hours talking about high performance and success, because Shawn's had so much of that. And I'm actually hoping today that we can maybe move beyond that, because you've also had some moments where you've had to work hard for that success and pivot and change. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit? I want them to hear your version of the story, maybe as far back as Tryline, or even if you want to go before that, maybe just your leadership journey and how you got to today.
I think at the core, growing up as a kid, there were a few things. I was the third of three boys, with a pretty big age difference between all of us. So I think a part of it is I kind of grew up in the shadow of my two brothers. One was 9 years older, or is 9 years older, and 5. And so I think a lot of it was just driven by the fear of being like the runt of the family. I was just, most of what drove me was, oh my God, I hope they were successful at school and in different rights. One was involved, in the arts and sports, and the other one was a great athlete and musician. And I just got to at least just not be like somebody who doesn't come out of this thing without, getting on the team and being a prefect. And so it drove me, I think, was part of it. And then I think innately I'm relatively competitive.
Yeah.
And then in the context of kind of what I always wanted to do, I always wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be the captain of the team. I didn't like not being a leader. Even if I was picked last, when they used to line us up, for sports, and I'd be picked last, it really bothered me. And it was like, I don't want to be I don't like it. I want to be picked last, And so I think part of that is kind of still innately in me even now, as a middle-aged man. And then the other one is just having gone through a tremendous amount of different experiences, a lot of them in sport. Rugby was my main sport, and it's been a common thread through my life since I was very, very young. And, it's a consummate team sport. And most of the learnings that I've brought with me and taken with me have come out of my involvement in the sport. It's a very combative, very challenging sport. And it's the consummate team sport. If the pieces, if all of the pieces don't come together, the whole doesn't work. You can have a team with some really great athletes, players, and the team will be fundamentally unsuccessful. And I think that's a common thread. And I've been on unsuccessful teams, and then I've been an unsuccessful captain, and there were very specific reasons for that. And I think the other common thread is just being a constant learner. I think the thread for me is that I'm in a constant learning mode. I'm never in a situation where I feel or think that I've got something figured out. I'm always under the assumption that I only know what I know at this very specific minute, and there's a whole lot of things that need to come behind that if I don't learn and I don't constantly iterate, I'll be left behind. And typically people, when they're not iterating and constantly reinventing, I think stagnate. And I think companies, when they're not constantly pushing the envelope, looking to iterate, especially, you know, now I'm in technology and e-commerce as a business, it's an exceptionally fast moving business, and the world is moving fast. So if you stand still, you're going to be left behind, whether you're running a team, whether you have a family. In all of these cases, you've got to keep on growing. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but I think those are the kind of the drivers. And then I have an immigrant mentality. You know, I came here with a backpack, and there wasn't anything handed to me. So I think there's an element of kind of you need to earn, and you got to fight for everything you get. Nothing ever comes easy. And I think those are the drivers for kind of what puts it in place.
Let's talk a little bit about, because I think it's important for people listening. When I met you, you know, obviously it wasn't your first work experience, but Tryline was a healthcare company. It still is, but it doesn't have that name anymore, I don't think, right? The brand has been engulfed, right, by when you sold the company. And now, like you said, you're in tech, which I'm sure there's a lot of differences, but I'd love to hear you talk about that. Like, if you compare the experiences of being a CEO in a healthcare company, and, you know, where you had products that you were delivering, and now, like, what's the difference for you as a CEO?
A lot of it is exactly the same.
Oh.
It's exactly the same. It's about technology is not built by technology. It's built by people. It's sold by people. Your customers are people. The people who use the technology and get the benefit from it are people. And at the end of the day, it's all about satisfaction, right? It's about creating something that has fundamental value. And you cannot disconnect what you want to do with your customers and treat the people that are providing it in a different way. There's got to be, it starts with your people. And if you then have a culture and a philosophy of how you do things, and it's got to be pretty dogmatic. I don't think there's a lot of room for kind of vacillation or wishy-washiness when you decide that you're going to behave in a certain way. You got to be, obviously you got to be flexible because people aren't all the same, but you got to be pretty specific about how and what you want to do, which is a very difficult thing, because a lot of people who want to run a company or have a business, it sounds good to say, I want to have a specific way of doing things, or a very specific philosophy, or a very specific set of principles. It's another thing to hold yourself accountable to them. It's like, I need all of you guys to do this. I need you to all be accountable. We all got to have teamwork. We all got to do this. It's another thing when you're not behaving in the same way. And then when the only time that you really get tested with your principles is not when things are going well.
Right.
When things are going well, it's really easy to kind of kumbaya and all of that stuff. It's when the chips are down that your principles and your philosophy and your culture gets tested. And having now, with both the businesses, they've gone through tremendous challenges. COVID last year was a massive challenge for us. There were certain decisions that we could have made that would have been really what you would have considered like the easy decisions, and would have been really bad decisions.
Yeah.
And the same thing when I was with Tryline, you know, we went through existential challenges. And the only reason we got through was because we had a foundation of a culture that people were able to mobilize behind. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about success. It was about how do we kind of all hunker down together and get things done. So I think in many respects, they were very, very different. A lot of what I brought with me to Freedomnomics has been kind of the compilation of everything I've experienced. When you started with us at Tryline, we were relatively dysfunctional. I thought, because I was believing my own story, that we were culture this and culture that. And we brought you in, I don't know if you remember, we brought you in because we thought we needed to accelerate the skill set of our middle managers, because we were awesome. And then you came in and we were like, started getting feedback from the middle managers, and it was like they're going like, why are they focusing on us? They're not exactly. And then we took a hard look, and then you really said to me, you said, Shawn, before we start with all of them, what about you? And a lot of you played a big part in creating an element of introspection and self-awareness, because there's an element of, like, do what I say, not what I do, come on, everybody. So I think having people or bringing people into your world, like you, I have another partner who's very candid and very, very, throughout my career has obviously been supportive, but he's not afraid to tell me the truth. And so it's important to have people in your life who aren't going to just kind of pander to you and give you a pat on the back, and because that can be really, really detrimental to your ability to move forward. And then
I think that's so important, Shawn. I wanted to get back. I know I just interrupted you, but you just said something so important. And I think I mentioned to you in our prep call, in the podcast before this with Alex McGann, we were talking about a different context, because Alex usually is a leader in big enterprise. But similar to what you're just saying, we were just talking about how do you create a real, not a culture. We say these words, and I think I was even listening to you talk, and I'm like, it's really easy, I think, for leaders to listen to successful leaders like you and hear you say certain things like culture, and for them to ingest it and believe it is something fancy that you print on the wall, or, but I wanted to just pause here and just say, everybody, like, what Shawn is amazing at, and I've watched him learn how to do it. He knew how to do it already, but I helped him, I think, a little bit along the way, hone some skills. And now you're amazing at it on your own and teaching your team to do it. But kind of like he said, being a little bit dogmatic sometimes, bringing culture to life every day and activating it in the way you make decisions and the way you behave. And maybe you did learn that in sports. I have to imagine that once you got whatever, you started to realize what the calculation is for winning. Maybe that's the All Blacks. I know that you're a fan and you use their book, etc. But I don't want to gloss past that, because it's easy to talk about all this stuff. And I think that when I coach new CEOs, for instance, and have to do exactly what you described, which is sometimes, be the person who says, time out, you're believing a lot of your own crap. You're saying a lot of the right things, but you don't actually realize every day how that's playing out. And by the way, half your people are afraid to actually tell you the real problems in your business, right? Which is not the intent, right? You might have honesty and openness and an amazing set of values that you believe are going to activate, like I said, honesty and transparency, but they're not at all, right? And so I just wanted to highlight that and just, say to everybody, and maybe you want to talk about it, Shawn, like it's ugly sometimes when you activate your values and open up conversations for the uncomfortable.
Yeah, of course. But from our perspective, it's like the dam is about to burst, and people don't want to tell you that the water's leaking out of the dam. I'd rather know, so that I can either start running or getting to higher ground or planning. And business is like that. You got to be ahead of the game. And we've grown dramatically. So when we were 40, 50 people, you could see them all, you could touch, you can speak about it, you could see their body language in the office, you could get the kind of the inputs. But now we're close to 300 people, and we grew 150 in a year, and all remote, haven't physically met anybody. And so how do you keep your culture going? And it's not just the culture, because you can have a bad culture, right? So it's, people say we've got to keep the culture going. It could also be bad. But it's about how do you stay connected and engaged with your people in a way that they become contributors, not only in work, but in concept and idea.
Yeah.
And how do you create an environment where they're telling you the dam's about to burst? And a lot of employees will sit and they'll go like, I'm sure somebody else knows about this. So if you create that environment, you're doomed. And, the best inputs for building and growing a business are the people who are actually doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that are speaking to the customers, that the ones that are using your technology, the ones that are suffering through your bad processes, the ones that are dealing with poor intra-communication. If you're not creating an environment where they're able to tell you and say, they're not telling you the company is lousy, but they're telling you that there's things about the company that need to improve. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because people say like, oh, well, that's like a new thing that you need to have now because everybody's remote. I think that it was no different when we were under the same roof. We just took it for granted. We just assumed that because we're under the same roof, you don't have to pay that much attention to it. But now that everyone's remote, we're going, oh my God, we've got to make sure we're getting their voice of the customer, voice of the employee. But it's no more relevant now than it was ever before. I just think we all became hypersensitive to the fact that, we got to, we used to be remote before. We were a third remote before. And we were pretty poor at it. We were pretty bad at it, because we had 70% of the people under one roof. And then because we're growing. And so we're starting to figure out how do we become like a broad-based entity. Now we're 100% broad-based throughout the world. You have to do things differently, but to some extent the same. You've got to be speaking to people. You've got to be giving them an avenue to communicate and let you know how things are going. And if you're not doing that, you do it at your peril because you don't know that the dam's about to burst.
Yeah, it's completely true. You just said something I want to clarify. So where are all your people now? 300. Woo!
Yeah, by the end of the year, we'll be 300, probably 275 to 280. More and more out of the country. So we're in about 6 different countries. We've got teams all over the world. Still the majority, I'd say, in the US, probably 70% in the US, round numbers, maybe 65% in the US. And then with COVID, what we did was in the old days, when you talk about the old days, we were pretty adamant that people would work in our LA office. It was an old paradigm, right? Yeah. And then when things went remote, we realized that, well, wait, we can get great talent and they can live anywhere in the country or the world. And we can expand our ability to acquire phenomenal talent by being less dogmatic. We would have people driving to the office from Palmdale, 2 hours in, 2 hours home, 4 hours a day.
Wow.
And we didn't stop to think like, maybe you could just work from home. There was like this thing about work from home. Now, it's not necessarily the only way to run the business, but there's definitely was some silliness in it before, which is you had Zoom before.
I know.
Before these things were existed.
The old days, before 2020.
It's all iterating and kind of looking at what's in front of you. There's a concept that I learned when I was a coach and have implemented it with I did it at Tryline and for Freedomnomics. And I don't think we speak enough. I used to meet with everybody and speak about it. It's called OODA, which is a concept that the Navy SEALs used. And I loved it for rugby because rugby is an iterative game. It's a player's game. Once you're on the field, the coach is out of the game. There's nobody to say, hey, stop, let's get in a huddle. This is the next play, go and do it. You have to iterate. It's the consummate kind of dynamic sport. And this concept of observe, orient, decide, act, and then go back to O. Because what that's going to do is put you in a new paradigm, and that will create your new reality based on what you see. You go through the OODA loop. It's called an OODA loop. And quite frankly, that's really what we're in, right? With COVID, with business, with your family, is nothing is stagnant. There's a set of circumstances. You respond to those set of circumstances. It creates a new reality. And based on that new reality, you've got to keep reiterating. And I think what we're dealing with in this world now is the classic environment for using your OODA loop. It's just constantly reassessing.
It is a paradigm shift for a lot of businesses. You know, I mentioned earlier, Shawn, you know, I should have you mentor some of these people I won't mention on the podcast, but you know, the first time I work with someone, and specifically if they're a first time CEO, one of the things I notice is that they don't naturally think the way you just described, right? They think, okay, I'm going to tell the board and my investors that we're going to do these things, right? Like I've been hired to do these things, and they take on a set of outcomes, for instance, and we build strategy around those outcomes, and we go tell everybody what to do, and you send your employees out to do that. And often one of the things that if I'm there with them as a coach that I get to witness, it's predictable to me now because I'm old, right? I've seen it lots of times, but you know, that moment when you start to realize like, oh shit, maybe our assumptions were wrong. Like, we're going full steam ahead on a strategy that might not actually work. Yep. And what I always do, and it's something you're actually good at, so in a second I'm going to have you talk about this, you know, but what I try to teach CEOs early is, first of all, that's going to happen sooner or later, and you actually have to prepare the organization for that in a very graceful like way, right? Like you have to nuance it, because you can't go to everybody and say, here's our strategy, we might be wrong. Mm-hmm. You have to go to them and say, this is our strategy, these are the outcomes, and we're going to drive towards it. But you also have to allow space, right, for your people, hopefully early in the game, to tell you when they think we might be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's like an art.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really boils down to trust. I honestly think so. I read it in one of Patrick Lencioni's book, which you put me onto many years ago.
Yeah.
A grade. And the one that he wrote, which was The Advantage, which I thought was really good. And a lot of stuff that we've taken into Freedomnomics came out of that book specifically. And the one that really resonated with me, and I tell everybody this all the time, and I think to some extent I got it before, but that really encapsulated it. He's got this thing about the pyramid of success. I think he calls it the pyramid of success. Mm-hmm. And it just really made sense, which is, you know, organizations, teams, families, people in relationships, they're always looking to get a result. I want you to love me more. I want to have a closer ties. I want to win more games. I want to make more money. I want to lose more weight. And they basically start with the result, but they don't understand that foundationally, especially in a team environment, it boils down to trust. And so the pyramid kind of lays it out really easily, where it speaks to your foundation. It's like saying, you know, what kind of roof do I want to put on the house? But you haven't decided how big the house is going to be. How many shingles do you even buy for a house that you don't even know how big it's going to be? And so people are like, results, results. But if you don't create that foundation of trust, people won't do things if they don't trust you, period. They won't go out of their way if they don't trust. If they don't trust the mission, if they don't trust the transparency, the honesty. And if you don't create and work on the trust, then you can't get into a place which is really what drives any organization or family or anything, which is conflict. Mm-hmm. Because if you haven't established that foundation of trust, when you have to have conflict, which is critical for being able to grow, you have to argue, you've got to debate, you've got to call each other out in order to create a high-performing team. There's no high-performing team where it's all kumbaya, I don't want to hurt your feelings, we're all good. You know, thank God, you know, my daughter, when I act silly, she tells me, you're being silly. It doesn't make me feel good, but it's because it's based on trust. She's not trying to pull me down. She wants me to be a better version of myself or my wife or whoever's doing it to me, my friends. And a lot of people don't have that in their life. They don't have that foundation. A lot of companies don't have that foundation of trust. And then you can have that healthy conflict. And once you can get through the healthy conflict, then you can get to a place of commitment where someone commits to something, and only then can you hold them accountable. If somebody's not committed, you can't hold them accountable, but everyone starts using the words. We got to be more accountable in this company. We got to have more commitment. You say, but do you even like that person you're working with? Not really. how are you going to have that other stuff? It's not even about like from a friendship perspective. It's about respect, knowing that that person will back you. And that boils down to culture, which is creating a culture where you get rid of silos, you get rid of politics. And the way that you do it is you don't tolerate it. When people are starting to politicize the organization or silo it or start kind of, it was them, it was them, it was them. Your job is, as the CEO, I believe in the leadership, is to say, no, that's not going to stand here. I don't care that we're not going to allow that. And then it boils down to the no, I can't use it on the TV, but Legacy, which is a book we use a lot, which is based on the sustainable success. The reason I love Legacy, and we've used it as a book for our people, every person has to read this book, whether they're a contractor, an employee.
Yeah.
And it's really so simple. There's 15 principles that the most successful sports team in the world used. And they're simple principles. There's nothing magical. You read any business book, they'll all tell you the same 15 principles. But it's how you implement them, how you hold yourself accountable to them. And one of them, which is the most magical principle, which honestly, if you have that in your life, which is, they call it, they've got a no D-heads rule. Mm-hmm. Basically, and obviously they learned that lesson, because when they had people in the organization that were D-heads, or they were cancerous.
Yes.
And so for us, that's a critical thing. And I think it's part of why we've grown to 275 people and have a pretty healthy culture, is because we've not hired those people, or when we have, we've eliminated them really, really quickly. And because it becomes cancerous. Your business is not dictated by the strength and power of the majority. It's dictated and driven by the energy and negativity and detractiveness of the minority.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. Wait, stop. That was just huge, what you just said. So look, you, full transparency, everybody, I said to Shawn off camera yesterday, when I say you, Shawn, you know, you live and breathe high performance. Back when I came to Tryline and met you and Rob and Barry and the team, one of the things I observed was, outside of the fact that you were all super intimidating and strong, you know, able to have conflict with each other, that I think, you know, we had to work on everybody, like employees, when they see leaders who have conflict with each other, they don't always know what to do with that, depending on where they've worked before. But immediately I saw how strong those bonds were, right? Because your point, like, you guys could have knockdown, drag out, intellectual conversations. And so what I saw in that was what you just described. And this is a lesson for everybody listening, right? There is a difference between allowing conflict and allowing people to be assholes. Different, yes. Different. And so you just said in the All Blacks book is no D heads, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of ways to describe this. But so it's really important, because you are really good at knowing the difference, right? Knowing what good productive conflict looks like, knowing what good behavior and bad behavior looks like, you know, spotting the people who, you know, on the outside can be intimidating and might actually look like a jerk to a lot of people, but maybe they're not, right? Maybe they actually are the smartest person there, willing to risk telling everybody that you're wrong. You're really good. So you actually don't tolerate it. And the interesting thing is, I find, is a lot of specifically young leaders, they don't always know the difference. And so they do tolerate the cancerous, toxic people for too long, specifically if those people, by the way, are bringing business results that they need. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So they let them live there that long. And you're right. Then the majority, or the toxic, cancerous people, kind of overshadow your good culture.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And, you know, listen, when you're starting a new business, I mean, my God, it's difficult enough as it is. everybody wants the rainmaker. You want that superstar. I mean, in a sports team, who doesn't want the biggest, fastest, strongest player, right? But if that person is in it for themselves, if their primary motivation is, look, great performers in business, in sports, have an ego. And if it's a healthy ego, but that's not put at the expense of everybody else, that's a driver to people. People want to feel good about what they do. They want to feel proud about it. That's not a bad thing. But when it comes with the I in it, if there's no I in team, but there's a narcissism that some performers carry, which if you allow that, it's the most having, and you asked me to think about when things haven't gone well, it's when I pandered to narcissistic behavior. When I worked with very talented, very, very smart people who use the word I more than we or us. And that's a trigger for me. It's like, I'm not interested in you. You're not going to succeed without everybody behind you, whether it's in sports and business. And you have to weed them out. And the short-term gains that you'll get, listen, some people have got really wealthy by working with people like that. And so that's a choice. But if your goal is sustainable, and that's why I love the Legacy book, because it's 100 years of ongoing winning. And if you look in business, there's certain businesses that have had sustainable success. What's his name? I forget his name. Who wrote the book Good to Great or whatever, and they speak about some of
Jim Collins.
Yeah. The ones that kind of they took the world over for a while, but how come they didn't sustain themselves? It's because they were doing those type of things, pandering to short-term gain and putting at risk the foundation to create the ongoing success. And so a lot of that stuff I've also learned from you. You showed us the concept of the growth curve, which was phenomenal.
Yeah, and
it's just so obviously graphically so simple and so obvious, right? And if you don't pay attention to that constant like existential growth curve that every organization goes through, you're going to miss the boat. And so we speak to people about that as well. But that made a big difference for us, Chris, because we are in technology, we are in a very fast growing industry. And if we're not making sure that we kind of bifurcate before we hit the rapids, the Niagara Falls, we're going to be out of it. And I think the time to failure in this new world is much quicker than in the old world.
Yeah.
It took you much longer to screw up a good organization in the older days, whereas it doesn't take very long now.
It's completely true. Yeah, can we talk about Freedomnomics? Because transparency, everybody, I don't know a lot of the people in this company, but I do know, the ones I do know, I know you've got some brilliantly smart people. I know you have a lot of maybe more introverted people on this team than what I've experienced on your teams in the past. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a different leadership, right? I think people who, you are a forward type A, gregarious leader. I don't know that all your leaders on this team are that. I don't know that that means they're less effective, but I do think it's important to talk about, what does it mean to, lead a high-tech organization? And I think you're so right, by the way. I think not only the world, but the industry you're in, it's probably at the front of the line in, talk about rapid transformation that most of which you're not in control of. So how do you lead in that context, maybe with a group of leaders who are more introverted, or they like to think about things for a long time before making decisions, I'm assuming. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think we're very lucky. My partners are geniuses. There's no question about it. But they also are exceptionally versatile. Great. So they're actually, my one partner is my best friend from when I was 18, Gary. We've been best friends forever and have played sports together at the highest level. And so we trust each other implicitly. And then our other partners are two brothers. and they trust each other implicitly. So the foundation, and then we trust each other implicitly. And then we have another partner who's been a long-standing mentor and business partner of mine for 30 plus years. So foundationally, we're strong. I think that is important, because if you have an owner group or your seniors, your senior group because people see, they say, children don't need to hear, they can just see how the parents are behaving, right?
It's true.
You can say all you want. And so I think everything stems from there. And then we've got the most remarkable group of senior leaders, literally, I mean, just exceptional people in their own rights. And they all come with their own skill set. Our operational leaders will take charge, very, very experienced. They all have the right personality for their roles, which is important as well. So diversity is important. You don't want to have a senior team of all, rah, get up on the table and start getting everybody, running through walls. You need that balance of introspection, of it's the DISC profile, right? You got to have all four of them in some capacity. And if you can get that, it's really amazing. And I think we do have that. And then because I think that at the core, they see that the 4 or 5 of us trust each other implicitly. We don't agree with each other all the time, but we trust each other. And then the other thing is, when we decide we're going to go in a certain direction, we go.
Yeah.
And we do not question. We don't go like, okay, we'll do it, but I bet you it's not going to, there's none of that kind of, okay, I'll acquiesce, but you know what? When it doesn't work, when we go, we put our heart and soul into making everything work. And I think that trickles down. I think that the rest of the group sees that, and at its core, they go like, yeah, these guys trust each other. There's not a lot of deflection amongst them. There's a commonality, and we're all different as well. The 4 or 5 of us are different. And then I think that's now permeated to our directors team. We're bringing in a lot of solid people. So I think at its core, if there's like that consistency throughout the organization, not necessarily in the type of people you are, but in the way in which you all work with each other, I think that's where you can create real magic.
Well, for sure. Like you could teach a master class on that. Can we talk, you and I talked a little bit about some business shifts that you guys have made at Freedomnomics. I mean, we could talk about that, or even, like you said, I did go through some existential crisis moments with you at Tryline for sure. Let's just talk about that, because I want to talk a little bit about when it gets messy, and like I said, how you handle that. And, maybe, I know you're talking to me, but really think about the fact that there's potentially thousands of young leaders who could listen to this, I hope. And, your wisdom about it is important, because you actually do this well. You recover from situations that other leaders might not recover from. I've watched it. And it's a skill, like it's an art.
Yeah, I hope this is a long interview. I could take these compliments all day long. This is wonderful. Keep them coming. As a coach, I've really tried to learn stuff. Really, as an athletic coach, it's like, how do you create a situation when things are going bad in sports, let's say? How do you get a team to continue performing? How do they break through? You're right. How do they get through that breakthrough moment? And most teams fall apart, right?
Yep.
And it goes down to your basic.
Well, most humans fall apart.
Well,
right?
I forget what the book is I read now, but it was about kind of, I forget what the book was, but it speaks to like the whole physiology of the brain.
Yeah.
And it really interested me. It interested me because it really made it simple for me, which is human beings at their core are fight, flight, or freeze.
That's right.
And I loved this book because it created this awareness. And then it spoke about the red side of your brain and the left side of your brain. And when the red is your reactive and the left is the logical. And if you can create that kind of magic between the right and the left, which if you want to call it the purple brain, is where you're going to function best. Because you're activating the red in a very deliberate way. And you're activating the logic in a very deliberate way versus allowing it just to become the natural default.
That's right.
I don't know that I've done this all my life, but as a general statement, the times when things, the chips are down, or when I really need to hunker down, I have been able to go to a place. Obviously, my initial response is, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, you're human. But then it's, okay, how do I get to that place where I am controlling which part of the brain I'm going to use? Mm-hmm. And you use the red deliberately, or you use the L deliberately, but you take control of because the situation in front of you didn't change. It's still there.
Right.
It's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you can manage is how you manage the way you're going to attack that problem and that issue. And the only way you can do it is you free yourself from the natural response to it: fear, anger, jealousy, whatever the seven deadly sins. And in sports, that's a massive thing, because the great athletes are the ones that can take adversity and have the resilience to almost separate themselves from what they're seeing and say, how do I work my way through this situation? I'm behind 20 points. I've got a broken leg. I just broke my nose. I've got to play through the game and separate. And it's breathing, to some extent. I wish I had this 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the ability to be as much as in tune with understanding how I'm reacting to something and why I'm reacting to it, and then make an active decision about how I want to. I don't do it all the time well, but I do it better. I do it better now, for sure. So when there's a fire with a client, or there's an issue with an employee, I have the ability now, better than I ever did before, was to separate my innate feeling about it and go to the analytical. What is the best way to get to a really good outcome? And by doing that, you typically get to a much better outcome.
Mm-hmm. I have seen you get hijacked before. So I do know what it looks like when you are not in your control of your red brain.
Yeah.
So I just had to balance out all those compliments, Shawn. Shawn is not a perfect human. But look, I think what you're describing, though, what's interesting is, it's interesting and important. And again, not easy for people, because it does take some discipline to do what you're talking about, right? Like, we have books like Play to Win. That's not the one you were describing, but we recommend to people all the time, at least starting to accept and understand that what you just said is true, right? That your body's programmed to respond to a strategy problem the same way it responded when we were cave people and were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, or whether I'm in a scrum, right? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Well, whatever. It's like our body doesn't know the difference. And so if you learn that, like you're saying, right? And I think you have honed that. But it's interesting, because it doesn't always mean that your team is going to make the right next decision to put you back on the right path. And, you were describing like the George Land growth curve we were talking about. And for everybody listening, in the free resources section of our website, racoach.com, I'll make sure that I have that, so anybody can download the George Land growth curve. It came from the book Grow or Die. And it is compelling, Shawn, and I think it is still very, very relevant, even though George wrote that a long time ago. He basically said, and he, of course, has passed, but I think if he was alive today, he would be saying the same thing you're saying, which is now the speed in which this is happening is much faster than it was 30, 40 years ago when he architected the model. But that basically, if you don't reinvent yourself, if you don't adjust your strategy, if you don't find the next path before it starts to be a problem, you're dead.
100%.
But that's hard to do, right? Like that is to me, that's like if I said, like, what are the top 5 things an executive team needs to know how to do now? Pivot your strategy, like identify issues with your strategy and pivot quickly. That might be number 2. Trust each other, create and maintain trust.
100%.
And then learn how to monitor, manage, and pivot your strategy might be number 2, right? Like I just look and I'm like, if you can't do those 2 things, good luck.
Yeah, but it's hard, right? Because you can't take the train off the tracks, right? You've got a train that's running down the tracks, and now you're trying to have it jump onto another set of tracks.
Right.
And then it boils down to capitalization. Do you have enough money? Do you have enough time? You also don't want to take away focus, right? So on the one hand, you go, we got to bifurcate. But for a lot of companies, that means just chasing every shiny object. Yeah. So it requires a lot of discipline to say, look, we understand that, you know, midterm, we've got to always be on the road for a bifurcation play, but it can't come at the expense of your core business, which is what's keeping the lights on, what's keeping your customers happy, what's employing your people. And so there's this kind of balancing act between having this constant awareness of the need to know that you're going to have to reinvent yourself in a certain way, but you don't change the foundation of who you are. You just change the stuff you do. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people think like, oh, we've got to reinvent ourselves. We've got to be something different. You say, no, the thing that got us here is the thing that will keep us successful. Resilience, hard work, dedication, trust, all of the basics. And then the other stuff becomes, you know, just having a true understanding of where you're strong and where you're weak, and then understanding and then never believing your own BS. The worst thing you can do is, you know, start believing all the stuff you put on your website, because it's not that you're lying on the website. You're obviously showing your clients what you can do, but you have to take stock of where you've got to improve and where you've got to be better, or else you're going to lose. And a part of that is, you know, it's funny, I was thinking about it because saying, most of the learnings come from what you did wrong. Totally. And to some extent, yes, but a lot of the learnings come from recognizing what you do well. Yeah. And bad coaches typically focus too much on the things that people do badly. Yep. And that becomes the total focus. And yet they forget or don't pay enough attention to the things that, whether it's a team or athletes or a company, saying, you know, we do this really, really well, which means we got to keep on putting a tremendous amount of focus on what we do well, because that's the thing that gave us the kind of the competitive advantage. And if that's taking care of your people, taking care of your customers, trying your hardest to get your customer a really great outcome, those are good things. But companies or people who start getting complacent, and I think it's something we spoke about with the growth curve with you, is the 2 biggest sort of Damocles that are going to hit you is arrogance or complacency. That's right. It's the death knell for an organization, a team, and a human being. And so then that's the other role I think that the CEO or the leadership team of a company have got to have, is you stamp out arrogance and complacency. When you got a bunch of excessive backslapping, and or just, you know, whatever, we're so good, nobody could ever beat us. You're ready. You're ripe for the picking. Yeah, it is so true. Yeah, you know, it's funny. Someone who you know well, Rob Crozier. So shout out to Rob. You know, he and I have been talking about, you know, what strategic planning should look like. And as you know, during COVID, we've been doing a lot of remote processes because people couldn't get together in a room, which has completely changed the dynamic. But the thing that is interesting about what you're saying is, Rob and I were talking about how, you know, if you take a SWOT exercise, just a simple strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and you go into an organization, you know, first we talk at the top of the house, but even if you go 1 or 2 levels down into your leadership team, you know, do your people actually understand what a SWOT is, and that a main part of it is leveraging strengths? 100%. To your point, right? Like not just setting a whole bunch of goals because you got a list of weaknesses, which is what everybody does. So yeah, I've been spending a lot of time talking about, you know, how do we teach people to do that better, when in most organizations, they spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong. Yeah, and that's very important. You know, I just went through the exercise. I've been doing it now with a whole group, all the way from our team leads all the way up to our senior team. We've been doing some, and our sales team, you know, so having them develop a SWOT analysis, give that feedback, it's phenomenal feedback.
Mhm.
And then your natural inclination is, okay, let's capture all the weaknesses and start working on it. And you don't pay any attention to the stuff they're talking about with opportunities or threats.
That's right.
Because threats are many times more relevant to your weaknesses.
It's true.
And obviously not saying, oh, okay, we're strong with that stuff, so we don't have to worry about it. It's having the balance. The thing about all this stuff, though, Chris, quite frankly, is it's all out there. You know, the best coaches in the world are the biggest thieves in the world, right? Just none of this stuff is kind of new. You know, it's all a compilation of, there's phenomenal business people, leaders, thought leaders, you know, sport athletes. You can learn from people who. So I think the biggest thing is to be like a lifelong learner. You know, for people who want to keep growing, you don't have to make this stuff up. But what you do have to do is, when you find stuff that resonates with you or makes sense, you then have to make it your own.
It's true. Look, you have to activate it. I mean, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say, Shawn, it's the perfect place to end, because he is right. Shawn, what you just said, right? Rarely is there completely new thinking. I'm with you. We've built our whole ARIA, we've built our business on bringing models like George Land and some of the things you and I have been talking about. And to me, it's doing, you know, what we've been talking about, like, okay, actually use it now. Like, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to teach you this. You're saying you like it. You're saying it makes sense. Now use it in real life, right? Like, don't just say, I read this book and this was a great book, and talk about it for 10 minutes and then, you know, on to the next thing.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the key to our lesson today is you actually have to do it.
Yeah, a lot of people read that good book and then they give it to someone else and they say, this is amazing, you got to read this book, you got to go, you know, you should really do this stuff, you know. But it's like, you know, you take the stuff, start doing it, and then people will start. It's really hard and it's really simple. I mean, it takes just a tremendous amount of focus and consistency. And I think that's where people fall apart, is that it's if you're going to do it, you've got to be in for the long haul. You can't be like a diet, a fad diet. You know, it's got to be, this is the way it is. And if you can do that on it, and if that becomes part of just the way you function, I think on the field, off the field, as they call it, you're going to probably have more success than failure.
Mm-hmm. I have another book. It's called How You Do Anything is How You Do Everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great name.
I didn't make it up, everybody. So, okay, Shawn, I guess I have to let you go do work now. I really appreciate you taking the time. I feel like we could do probably about 10 of these, and I still couldn't get all the wisdom out of you. So,
well, thank you. Thank you for everything. You know, I learned a lot from you. A lot. It was, I would say, you know, it's like great athletes, great business people, right? They all need a great coach, right? And once you recognize that you just don't know everything, your people are CEOs. There's no such thing as CEO school, right? You kind of, and so you have to learn, and you have to have good coaches and mentors and people who call you out on your BS. And if you can have that, you know, then you've got a good, and then surround yourself by just remarkable people. If you in your personal and your business life, you make sure that you're very picky about who you kind of hang out with, you've probably got a good chance of being successful.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Great.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. I hope everyone's subscribing. If you haven't and you're listening to this on Spotify or one of the other platforms, and you go back to ariacoach.com for free, you and your people can just subscribe. And inside there's tons of wisdom, not just from Shawn, but other leaders, and a bunch of the resources, some of the ones we talked about today, just free for download for any of you and your leaders, because things are moving fast. We got to get to as many people as possible as quickly as we can, and more goodness. So with that, all right, Shawn, thank you. And thanks everybody.